Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perdichizzi, and thank you for joining me. As always, the summer months are upon us. The Scott Fish Bowl is set to kick off next week, which is like literally the inaugural get ready for the next upcoming college fantasy football season. Here at Saturday to Sunday, we continue to cover all things from the 2024 NFL Draft. If you missed last week's episode, I updated my Dynasty Rookie Rankings. I had now been through multiple rookie drafts, a startup dynasty draft, and I get a much better gauge on how I would put my rankings into action. Shared that with you last week. What I'm doing today is something I've done each of the previous couple years is I blend the previous two classes rankings together. So a combined blended 2023 and 2024 dynasty rookie rankings. I think it's a great exercise for a variety of reasons. One, if you have not had your rookie drafts yet, and they're summer rookie drafts, I know I still have a couple left to do this summer. It's a great way to kind of gauge like the value of a draft pick compared to a player from last year's class, maybe to think about a trade. Second, it's a great way to think about, I know I recently, about a couple weeks ago, completely redid my positional overall dynasty rankings, and it's a great way to try to fit where these last 2 years rookie classes kind of fit in, to blend them together amongst all the other obviously players in overall positional dynasty rankings. We're not going to get into the overall dynasty rankings just yet tonight, but I did think it's a great exercise to compare last year's class. Now we have a whole year of data, obviously, so that moves the needle a lot compared to these incoming rookies who we've never seen play down in the NFL just yet. So I will share my blended 2023 and 24 dynasty rookie rankings, kind of help gauge you for your dynasty leagues, any rookie drafts you might still have, trade conversations. I think it's a fun exercise, especially with how many guys we had in last year's draft class who really performed well in their rookie year. And then you combine that with a really deep class in terms of the quarterbacks and the wide receivers this year. It really makes for an interesting discussion on how to rank these guys. So let's get right into it. Let's start at the quarterback position. Remember, this is 2023 and 2024 rookie rankings, combining them together. For me, my QB1 in this ranking would be CJ Stroud, obviously out of Houston, great rookie year. Following up, I think this is the first hot debate topic, is Anthony Richardson of the Colts. Obviously, limited games last year due to injury, but what we saw was elite fantasy production. I have him ahead of the top two quarterbacks in this draft class, which at number 3, I have Caleb Williams, obviously of the Bears. Number 4, Jaden Daniels, who went to the Commanders. And number 5, I have Drake May, also from this year's draft class. At number 6, I sneak back in last year's first overall pick, Bryce Young, who obviously had everything go wrong with him last year. We'll see if he can turn it around, but I have Bryce Young at 6, ahead of J.J. McCarthy, who I have at 7, who got drafted by the Vikings. Then I go back to last year's draft class with Will Levis at number 8. See what he gets to do as a first full year starting for the Titans, upgraded receiver core there. It's going to be interesting to kind of see how Levis performs. Then number 9, I have Michael Penix Jr. Number 10, I have Bo Nix, rounding out the other two quarterbacks from the first round in this year's draft class. And then I go back to last year, Aiden O'Connell, who's going to get an opportunity to start for the Raiders this year, made some starts last year. And then I round out my top 12 with Spencer Rattler, who was a day 3 pick this year. We'll see, how he gets a chance to perform there in New Orleans if he gets an opportunity behind, Derek Carr, and we'll see if he gets, a chance this year. Is it an opportunity down the line? I think we'll find out, but I think it's an interesting discussion nonetheless. So there is my combined 2023 and 2024 quarterback rankings for the last 2 years rookie classes. I think the interesting debate starts right at the top. I think CJ Stroud, even though he doesn't have the rushing ability, what he did as a rookie last year, while it's not Mahomes level, it's in that Joe Burrow level of fantasy production. So for me, he sits, I think he's number 3 in my overall dynasty quarterback rankings. So, I have Mahomes, Josh Allen, and CJ Stroud. So if I have CJ Stroud 3rd in my overall dynasty rankings, he's got to sit at the top of this, blended 2023 and 2024 dynasty rookie rankings. So CJ Stroud sits at the top, but then I think it's debatable. If somebody wants to say Caleb Williams ahead of Anthony Richardson, I can understand it. If somebody wants to say Jaden Daniels also ahead of Anthony Richardson, I understand it. But what I know is, one, I was a huge Anthony Richardson fan last year before he ever played it down in the NFL. Then he literally set the league ablaze early on last year with high-end fantasy production. So for me, since we've already seen it, since we've seen that fantasy production, while he got hurt last year, to me, his body type is more of the Josh Allen or Cam Newton types. So I think there's a little bit less risk in terms of injury that there might be to a guy like Jaden Daniels. So for me, Anthony Richardson right there, but really we're talking Anthony Richardson, Caleb Williams, and Jaden Daniels. I think they should all be taken within 8 to 10 picks of each other in a dynasty startup draft. I think you can rearrange them. I think Caleb Williams, I think it goes Anthony Richardson, Caleb Williams, a little bit of a dip, and then Jaden Daniels. I'd have Jaden Daniels right there with those two. And I think you can make the case Richardson or Williams, Williams or Richardson, whichever way you want to rank them. I could totally understand the rationale behind it. I don't think Caleb Williams is going to be a huge runner at the next level. I think he's going to mix it in a little bit. I think Anthony Richardson, obviously, and Jaden Daniels have that X factor to be an elite running quarterback and pick up fantasy points that way. So I do think that 2, 3, 4 there of Richardson, Williams, and Daniels is very much a tier. I think you can rank them inside there if you want to slide Richardson to 4 after Williams and Daniels. I don't think that is a bad decision. It's just not the way I have it ranked right now. But I can understand any ordering of those 3 prospects. I do have Drake May ahead of everybody else then, because I think that just combines the arm talent, traits, and athleticism. While Bryce Young coming out was a cleaner prospect, I think, at the time than Drake May, we saw Bryce Young really struggle last year. Was it all the surrounding cast? Was it the size and frame of Bryce Young? I think that's to be determined. But Drake May's ceiling, I think, is higher than a guy like Bryce Young. His traits, his physical traits, are higher than Bryce Young. His rushing ability is far superior to Bryce Young. To add that to the fantasy repertoire, so for me, it's clearly Drake May ahead of Bryce Young. I think where some people would differ is maybe having JJ McCarthy or Will Levis ahead of Bryce Young. I still want to believe in the player that I thought was worthy of being the top pick in last year's NFL draft. What could go wrong did go wrong last year in Carolina. So I'm willing to give Bryce Young another chance. I think we'll find that a lot pretty early on this year if we see a much better version of him in terms of showing growth and development. A coach who was brought in, in Canales to help him grow, create an offense that catered to his skill sets and minimize his flaws, including the size and frame. And I think they'll do that. They upgraded the receiving core in a variety of ways. So I'm excited to see Bryce Young. To me, Bryce Young and JJ McCarthy, they were polar opposites in terms of what I thought about them coming out. I thought Bryce Young was worthy of being a top overall pick. I thought JJ McCarthy was a late first round or early second round prospect. So yes, JJ McCarthy landed in the better landing spot, better O-line, better receivers, et cetera, et cetera. But for me, they weren't even comparable in terms of evaluating their college film. Bryce Young was an elite college player. JJ McCarthy was on an elite college team that he was not the focal point of that. He was not the engine that drove Michigan's team. So I still have Bryce Young ahead of JJ McCarthy. I think Will Levis versus Michael Penix and Bo Nix is interesting. I do have Will Levis ahead of him just because of the immediate opportunity. If Michael Penix was going to be a starter from year 1, or even year 2 definitively, I think I would have Penix ahead of Will Levis. But this right now I have it flip-flopped. I'm excited to see Will Levis push the ball. He's going to push the ball vertically down the field, and now he's got Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins. He's got weapons there to do that. It's going to be interesting. As I talked about on the last pod, I do have Michael Penix ahead of Bo Nix. It's very much a ceiling versus floor thing. I think Michael Penix's ceiling is far superior than Bo Nix, but I understand if someone wants to take Bo Nix ahead of him because he's going to get immediate opportunity compared to Michael Penix, who has to wait a year or two. We'll see. And then rounding out, like I said, Aiden O'Connell, Spencer Rattler. That's just O'Connell's going to get an opportunity to play. Spencer Rattler is a guy who I like his traits more, but who knows if he ever gets an opportunity. Aiden O'Connell will get an opportunity this year to be the starter. So that's why I have him ahead of Spencer Rattler. So let's take this over to the running backs. Again, blended 2023 and 2024 Dynasty Rookie Rankings. Number 1 and 2, very easy. Bijan Robinson out of the Falcons, Jahmyr Gibbs out of Detroit. If somebody wants to flip-flop them, I'm not going to argue with you. I'm still going to buy that Bijan Robinson. We're going to see a much better version of him than what we saw last year. Jahmyr Gibbs, I still think you have to worry a little bit about, maybe some workload limitations or touchdown vulturing, but I still think, Gibbs scored plenty of touchdowns last year. Prolific player in his own right. I have Bijan 1. I think Gibbs not that far behind them in overall Dynasty running back rankings. I have him there number 2. I think you start to have conversations as soon as number 3. I couldn't get myself off of Devin Achane of Miami. Obviously, anyone who's been a longtime listener of Saturday Sunday knows I was as big an Achane proponent as anyone. I thought he warranted being closer to Jahmyr Gibbs than I thought any other running back in last year's class. It ended up he fell a lot further than expected. But then he obviously took the lead by storm. Obviously, injuries hampered him a little bit last year. You can make concerns that, they went out and drafted another running back, Jalen Wright, very talented player I'll talk about momentarily. They still got Raheem Mostert there. But I love Devin Achane. I think he's a prolific, big play threat waiting to happen. I've been comparing him to CJ Johnson for 2 years now. So I have him there at number 3. Then I do pivot over to the most recent class, and I have Jonathan Brooks of Carolina 4th, Trey Benson of Arizona 5th. Obviously, Brooks coming off of that injury, but it sounds like he's going to be ready to go early on. I think he's going to be a guy that we'll see his best as the season progresses. And, we'll kind of see Chuba Hubbard will probably hold down the fort and work in a timeshare with him maybe early on. And then we'll see, I think Brooks sees that opportunity, but you could say the same thing about the guy who was taken, half a round or so later than him and Trey Benson. Trey Benson's playing there in Arizona behind James Conner. You're going to see James Conner start the year probably as the clear guy, but I think Trey Benson will quickly work his way into a bigger role, and by next year he could be the bell cow there. I am very in on Trey Benson in all formats. I think that top 5 is pretty clear cut. I think if most people were going to rank the 2 running back classes blended together, I think most people would have those guys as the top 5. I think most people would have it in that order. I think where things start to get a little interesting is 6 through 10. I think you can make a case to rank these in a lot of which ways. For me, I have Tyjae Spears at 6. I think he's the best running back on the Titans. I think he's better than Tony Pollard at this point. When we saw him last year, he was making a lot of big plays. I think he's going to be in a timeshare, so that's a little bit concerning. But when you see the other guys ranked around here, we know Spears is at least going to be involved this year, and I think he's still got long-term upside, so that's why I have him at 6. I have Blake Corum of the Rams at 7, obviously playing behind Kyren Williams, who set the league on fire last year. Obviously, he battled some injuries. If Blake Corum gets an opportunity to be the guy, I would have him ahead of Tyjae Spears. If there was no Kyren Williams, I think, Blake Corum would probably be 5th on this list, in that situation there with the Rams and just how much the running back gets worked and utilized there. But I have Blake Corum at 7 of the Rams. I have Marshawn Lloyd of Green Bay at 8. We've talked a lot about Lloyd. Josh Jacobs, really only a 1-year deal, so he could step into a big role by year 2. I think he'll have a role even this year alongside Josh Jacobs. At number 9, I have Jalen Wright of Miami. Again, this is a little bit of a hedge. I think he's a big play threat waiting to happen. If it ends up being in a year from now, Raheem Mostert's no longer there, I think Devin Achane and Jalen Wright could be a 1-2 duo with a lot of upside and big playability, which is why even if it's a 1B role for Jalen Wright, I have him ahead of Zach Charbonnet, who I have as my 10th rated running back in this rankings of Seattle. I wasn't a huge Charbonnet guy. I think he's a good player. I never thought he was worthy of being a round 2 guy. I thought he was a more athletic, better version of AJ Dillon. Sure. Which, so I thought he should have been a mid-round 3 type guy or even an early day 3 guy. He went early in the mid-round 2 or whatever it was, but Kenneth Walker's just a better player. Kenneth Walker is more explosive. He's to me, he's a much better all-around player. So I think he's going to keep Zach Charbonnet at bay, even if it is a kind of like a dual backfield, a 60-40. I think Walker has shown more upside in the passing game to make more after the catch, even though I think Charbonnet was a better college pass catcher than Kenneth Walker was. But I think Zach Charbonnet's catch the ball and fall down. I think Kenneth Walker, if you catch him on a screen, you catch him on a flare out, he can make a big play afterwards. So I think Kenneth Walker, I don't think Zach Charbonnet is he's the receiving back. He's the change of pace back. He's maybe got more power. Maybe he steals some touchdowns from Kenneth Walker, but I don't think he's a guy that's going to be the big play guy or the clear receiving guy. I think Jalen Wright, even as a 1B to Devin A-Chain, could be more fantasy valuable down the line than Zach Charbonnet. The next pivot point, I think, comes from like that 11 to 15 range. I have Chase Brown of the Bengals there at 11. I think he's going to seize a pretty significant role there with the Bengals. Him and Zach Moss, I think, could both be fantasy viable this year. There is some concerns I just recently heard on the most recent Established to Run podcast. Adam Leviton and Evan Silver were talking about possibility of Samaje Perine being cut in Denver and then Cincinnati bringing him back to be more of that pass protector, third down back. That would be very concerning of Chase Brown, because we need Chase Brown in that role to be that change of pace, evolve into a better pass catcher, which he was a decent pass catcher in college, and team up with Zach Moss. I think he's a very great athleticism, great college production. I think there's a lot to like about Chase Brown. In glimpses last year, he showed that big playability, but I have him at 11. I have Kendre Miller of the Saints at 12, Tyrone Tracy of the Giants, 13, Ray Davis of Buffalo this year, 14, and Jaleel McLaughlin of Denver, 15. Now you're talking about two guys last year. One was a third rounder and one was a fourth rounder. You're talking about Tyrone Tracy, who was a fifth rounder this year, Ray Davis, who was a fourth rounder, and then Jaleel McLaughlin, who was a UDFA last year. You can mix and match these guys in any which way you want. I started, like I said, with Chase Brown because I do think we're going to get immediate production this year from him, and fantasy viability is potentially an RB3/flex. I think Kendre Miller would be next because I think this is Alvin Kamara's last year there. So it's possible that Kendre Miller could form some type of timeshare this year with him and then maybe seize the backfield next year. I like Tyrone Tracy a lot. Anyone who's been a listener knows how much I like him. I'm attacking him in rookie drafts where I can get him. But he was a fifth-round pick. So, like, the Giants could look at him as a guy who pass-catching running back, part-time running back. We'll see. It's still a fifth-round pick. So, for right now, I'll have Kendre Miller ahead of him. I'll have Chase Brown ahead of him. But I do think Tyrone Tracy's ceiling is higher than Chase Brown and Kendre Miller. Because if he was to seize the opportunity that is there in the Giants' backfield, I think he could become the lead of that backfield later in rookie year or by year two, but that's asking for a lot of a fifth round running back, late fifth round pick, who also was converting, only had played running back for 1 year after being a former wide receiver. Ray Davis, I think, is going to form a nice backfield share with James Cook, but I think people are underestimating how good James Cook was last year. So I think James Cook's a better pass catcher. He's got better athleticism. He's got better speed. Ray Davis is good, tough runner, reminds me a lot of in some ways a Ray Rice type player in terms of his frame and stuff like that. And he was very productive in the SEC, and he might steal some touchdowns from James Cook, but so does Josh Allen. And I still think there's a role for Ray Davis, but I don't see him eating into a huge portion of James Cook's fantasy viability. So he sits there. Jaleel McLaughlin might be the guy who might be a little too low on this. The buzz coming out of Denver is that he's been their best running back. Javonte Williams has not looked good. We know that Sean Payton has utilized guys like Jaleel McLaughlin and gotten fantasy goodness from them. I could still see Jaleel McLaughlin being a very good, RB2, RB3 in PPR leagues if he becomes a guy that Bo Nix constantly is checking down to and utilizing there. So interested by Jaleel McLaughlin. Then after that, we're kind of blending together the guys from this year and last year. I have at 16, Audric Estime of Denver, 17, Kamani Vidal of the Chargers. Those two guys I talked a lot about on the last. I do think they have an opportunity sooner rather than later to maybe seize a part of that backfield in Denver and the Chargers. I have Tank Bigsby at number 18. Listen, I love Tank Bigsby coming out of college, but what could go wrong went wrong last year. Just don't know how long the leash is going to be to give him an opportunity to become a viable part of that backfield next to Travis Etienne. back to this year, I have Will Shipley and Bucky Irving. I could see a path where Will Shipley develops into the handcuff to Saquon Barkley and is utilized in a variety of ways. I could see Bucky Irving eating into a little bit of Rachaad White's time there, and also have an opportunity down the line to maybe seize a bigger role. And then I have Roschon Johnson at 21, who I like Roschon Johnson coming out of college, but he doesn't have that calling card. He's not a great receiver out of the backfield. He's a good receiver. He's got average athleticism. He doesn't have good or very good athleticism. He's not a home run threat. He doesn't have great power. He's just a solid running back across the board. I just don't know if that turns into a big opportunity in fantasy. So that's why I have him after Shipley and Bucky Irving. Then I have Isaac Guerendo at 22 of the 49ers. I have him ahead of Keaton Mitchell. Obviously, Keaton Mitchell coming off an injury. They drafted Rasheen Ali, who I have at 24, and they also brought in Derrick Henry. So a lot of moving parts there in that Baltimore backfield. And then I round out 25 through 29. 25 Braylon Allen, 26 Eric Gray, 27 Dylan Lobb, 28 Sione Vaki, and 29 Evan Hull. We'll see if any of those guys get an opportunity. Lobb might get a chance to be a little bit of a specialist there with Las Vegas in a pass catching role. We'll see if Sione Vaki can maybe seize an opportunity there in that Detroit backfield to be the number 3 back. And then maybe in a year from now, if David Montgomery's not there, could he emerge as the second guy behind Jahmyr Gibbs? It's intriguing with his athleticism and the limited time he played at running back, but how good he looked there when he got that opportunity in college. Let's take this over to the wide receivers. Last year's rookie class was unbelievable. Now you blend in the greatness of this year's class. This was clearly the hardest one for me to rank. At number 1, Marvin Harrison Jr. of Arizona. Number 2, Malik Nabers out of the Giants. Number 3, Puka Nacua out of the Rams. Number 4, Rome Odunze out of Chicago. Let's start right there. The fact that 2 guys I have ranked ahead of Puka Nacua, who just had one of the elite rookie years of all time, speaks volumes of just how great of a prospect Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Nabers are. It also speaks volumes on how quickly they are going to get entrusted to a big-time role in their offenses and just how high their ceiling is. If somebody wants to have Puka Nacua at number 1 on this list and Marvin Harrison and Malik Nabers after him, I think you could strongly make that argument. If you believe in, I want to see some greatness first, and we've already seen true greatness from Puka Nacua, I could totally understand that. I'm trying to project out. I think in 3 years from now, they're all top 10 wide receivers in the league. I think Marvin Harrison and Malik Nabers have the ability to be top 5 in the league. That's how special of a prospect I think they are. So that's where I went with those guys right there. I have Rome Odunze 4th, and I kind of think Rome Odunze is right there with Marvin Harrison and Malik Nabers. But because year 1, we just might not see as much opportunity. What if Keenan Allen has a great year and they bring him back and he wants to stay in Chicago to end his career? We don't know Rome Odunze's role. He could seize it, and by the end of this year, be pushing DJ Moore to be the best receiver in Chicago, or he could be the clear 3rd option this year, the whole year, like Jackson Smith-Njigba was last year in Seattle. And then we don't know exactly about his rookie 2nd year. So that's why I have Puka ahead of Rome and Rome there. 5 through 9, I went all the way back to last year's. That's Zay Flowers of Baltimore, Tank Dell out of Houston, Jordan Addison of Minnesota, Jackson Smith-Njigba out of Seattle, Jaden Reed out of Green Bay. After that, then I pivot to this year's class, which is Xavier Worthy, Ladd McConkey, and Brian Thomas. But here's the thing. It was very hard for me to possibly rank Worthy, McConkey, or Thomas ahead of any of those guys I just talked about from last year. 1, their film evals coming out were pretty similar. Late round 1 to mid round 2, most of those guys is what I thought their value was pre-draft. Then we see those guys come out, and a lot of them performed great their rookie years. Zay Flowers, great moments. Tank Dell, unbelievable. Jordan Addison, great rookie year. Jaden Reed, unbelievable. Smith-Njigba in the mix there. I think it's just more of an opportunity. I still believe he was the best wide receiver in last year's class. Obviously, Puka Nacua has now earned that title now, but coming into the draft last year, I thought it was Jackson Smith-Njigba. I'm still very high on him, so that's why I still have all of those guys ahead of Xavier Worthy, Ladd McConkey, and Brian Thomas. Fast forward 6 weeks, 8 weeks into the NFL season, some of these guys might leapfrog these, but the rookie class was so strong last year, I can't rationalize having Worthy, McConkey, or Thomas ahead of any of those guys who performed really well last year in all instances except Smith-Njigba, which I think was more just an opportunity thing over those guys. So that's kind of how I have it. I think Zay Flowers has the highest ceiling of any of those guys as being the number one guy in Baltimore. Tank Dell obviously now going to vie with Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs there, but I just love what he did last year. The relationship he has with CJ Stroud. I'm not pushing Tank Dell further down the ranks. Jordan Addison, great rookie year, but now Jefferson's fully healthy, integrated a new quarterback there, so we'll see about Jordan Addison. Still love the player. I still think all those guys warrant being above Jackson Smith-Njigba because we've already seen those guys have great rookie years. Jaden Reed really I struggled with him versus Smith-Njigba, but I put Smith-Njigba ahead because I still think he's got the higher ceiling. Jaden Reed scored a lot of touchdowns last year, which carried some of his fantasy production, and Green Bay is just loaded with young receivers there. Hard to know how that's going to play itself out. Jaden Reed would be the one that I contemplated dropping behind Xavier Worthy and Ladd McConkey, who I think Xavier Worthy steps into a great situation with Kansas City. Ladd McConkey steps into an unbelievable situation with the Chargers. But right now, Jaden Reed's production was just too good to ignore it his rookie year. And he still had good draft capital last year as like a mid-second round pick as well. So I kept him there. At number 13, I have Rashee Rice. Obviously, if the suspension wasn't looming, if they didn't go out and get Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy, you could make the case if you would have done these rankings, if none of that existed and you would have, probably Rashee Rice deserves to be a little bit higher, but there's some circumstances that are obviously pushing him down to 13. Then I go back to this year's class for my next 5. Keon Coleman, 14. Ricky Pearsall, 15. Xavier Leggett, 16. A.D. Mitchell, 17. Jalen Polk, 18. Talked about them on the last. It's an interesting little mix there. I have the first 3 guys in a tier, Coleman, Pearsall, Leggett. I have Mitchell and Polk. It's very much a ceiling versus floor type ranking there. Go back to last year's rookie class at 19, Josh Downs. If the Colts didn't invest in A.D. Mitchell, you would see Josh Downs much higher on this list. I was at the forefront of being one of the biggest Josh Downs supporters, thinking that he was right there with Zay Flowers and Jordan Addison last year before the draft. Really high on him. He had a good rookie year, but I just, with Michael Pittman there, with the drafting of A.D. Mitchell, a strong run game in Jonathan Taylor, a running quarterback, it just moved Josh Downs a little bit down the board, but still intrigued with the overall skill set. Jermaine Burton at 20, Dontavian Wicks at 21. That's a ceiling thing. There's a real opportunity for Jermaine Burton to become T. Higgins next year as the clear number 2 to Jamar Chase. Green Bay, we're still trying to figure out that, that pecking order there in Green Bay. So that's why I have Dontavian Wicks at 21, but I love the ceiling. If he emerges, he could be the best wide receiver in that Green Bay depth chart for sure. After that, then I have some mixing of last year and this year. I have a 22, Jalen Hyatt. I don't think we've seen the best out of him. Last year, production was limited, but that was more due to the quarterback play of the Giants and the anemic offense. I think this year, with the attention being on Malik Neighbors, with a healthy Wando Robinson in the slot, Jalen Hyatt's going to see a lot of single coverage. I think we're going to see we're not going to see a lot of volume from Jalen Hyatt, but I think we're going to see a lot of production and big play production from Jalen Hyatt. I have, right after him, I have Roman Wilson. I think he could step in and be the Deontay Johnson type player in Pittsburgh. We'll see how much they're going to throw the ball, though. Is George Pickens the only one that could really be fantasy viable? 24, I have Marvin Mims. Obviously, they invested a second-round pick last year, but I have Troy Franklin right after him at 25 because I don't know how that's going to play itself out. They still got Courtland Sutton there. Troy Franklin had a day 2 grade for a lot of people, I think Denver included, but he fell to the early portion of day 3 in round 4. But it easily could be, even though they took Mims late round 2 and Franklin early round 4, they might see it differently now a year later. Maybe they didn't give Mims a lot of chances last year. We kept asking for it, but for a team that was lacking big plays, they didn't want to put him out there. So, there could be a little bit behind the scenes that we're unaware of there. So I have those guys side by side. Then I have Malachi Corley. He was handpicked. Aaron Rodgers wanted him. The Jets really were enamored by him. We'll see how much he could turn that jack of all trades, versatile offensive chess piece into fantasy viability. At 27, I have Javon Baker. I think he could seize an opportunity there with the Patriots. His talent is better than a round 4 talent. there were reasons that pushed him there, but his talent is higher than that. I have Quentin Johnson at 28, a first-round pick. Now, I wasn't high on Quentin Johnson last year, but I never could have imagined, if you told me fast forward a year from now, do these rankings, that a guy who was selected top 20, top 21, whatever it was, would be 28 in a blended wide receiver rankings of 2 draft classes only. Never would have believed it. He's got to show that he can materialize. They got to use him better. They tried to make him a traditional X wide receiver. That was not his game in college. He's a guy that, for his size, moves well. You gotta use him almost as a big slot or a Z. Get him going on crossers, get him the ball, and let him use his athleticism for his size and space a little bit. Not just ask him to win downfield, because that's not who he is. He doesn't play to his size dimensions, and that was my biggest concern about his game: separation and playing up to his measurements. 29, I have Jalen McMillan. I think he's going to get an opportunity down the line to seize a role there in Tampa Bay. 30, Demario Douglas. Hard to know. Douglas had a really strong rookie year, but there's a lot of moving parts there with that Patriots pass catching room. So I'm not sure, if he's going to continue to get the same amount of looks. 31, Michael Wilson of Arizona, going to get an opportunity to be the starter alongside, I think, Marvin Harrison Jr. 32, Luke McCaffrey. We'll see if he can, become the third wide receiver there, maybe even push Jahan Dotson down the line. 33, Devontae Walker. 34, Jake McCown. 35, Malik Washington. 3 guys from this year's class. And let's round it out tonight with the tight end group. Obviously, a historic group last year. This year, one elite prospect, a couple other interesting guys. So number 1, Sam Laporta. Easy to do that. No matter how great Brock Bowers was, Laporta just was unbelievable. He's tight end 1 in overall dynasty ranks. So obviously, he's going to be tight end 1 when you're just talking about 2 rookie classes. I have Dalton Kincaid, who I think has a real chance to catch 100 passes this year and be the tight end 1 overall in fantasy. So he's my number 2. Brock Bowers, love the prospect. We'll see, him getting, drafted by the Raiders. We'll see how they use him and Michael Mayer. But Brock Bowers sits at number 3 for me. Clearly ahead of the other guys from last year and the rest of this class. Luke Musgrave is number 4. I'm still a Luke Musgrave guy. Some people might not have him where I have him. I still think he's going to seize control of that and be the clear tight end 1 there. Tucker Kraft more of a backup. I think the big plays, his athleticism, his ability to win vertically, attack the seam, is a lot to like about Luke Musgrave with that athletic package he offers. I have Ben Sinnott at number 5. I'm sure a lot of people might flip Ben Sinnott on Luke Musgrave. I can understand that. Then I have Michael Mayer at 6. I'm not ready to bury him in rankings just yet. I think there's a way that he could still be viable and Brock Bowers be viable. They don't have so many other great pass catchers, besides they have their clear starting 2 wide receivers. But I think you can make the case that Mayer and Bowers can both have some viability. Obviously, Bowers the higher ceiling, but I'm not ready to bury Michael Mayer just yet. Maybe his opportunity comes on a new team in a year, in a trade, or down the line after free agency. We'll see. I have Jatavian Sanders, number 7, ahead of last year's Tucker Kraft, only because I think Jatavian Sanders can get an opportunity. I've comped him very much to Isaiah Likely. I know he had a terrible pre-draft process, but he was a great pass catcher in college for Texas. Ends up in a good situation here with Carolina, where he can maybe seize the role soon rather than later. I have Tucker Kraft at 8 because I understand that I could be wrong. Maybe Luke Musgrave doesn't hit the ceiling that I think he has, and then Tucker Kraft moves up this list, and Luke Musgrave just becomes a guy who kind of flames out, is a backup, and never materializes into more. So I think Tucker Kraft showed glimpses last year. I like Tucker Kraft coming out of college. I think he warranted going as a 3rd-round rookie last year. It's just he was unfortunate that he kind of got picked in the same there with Luke Musgrave, because their values are negatively being impacted by both of them being on the same team. Then after that, I go back to this year's class with a whole bunch of guys. Theo Johnson of the Giants, Eric All of the Bengals, Jared Wiley of Kansas City, Cade Stover of Houston. I think those guys all have an opportunity by year 2, minus Jared Wiley, unless Travis Kelce retires, to start seeing more work. I think Johnson could theoretically seize the opportunity this year and become the Giants starter. I think there's a real possibility Eric All, once he comes back from injury, could be the starter by next year. I think Wiley, once Travis Kelce does call it quits, has starter upside and starter traits. Cade Stover, I really like Cade Stover. Obviously, they just gave Dalton Schultz, I think, a 3-year contract extension, so that kind of hinders Cade Stover, but I think there's an opportunity as a stash down the line for Kate Stober to materialize into a decent pass catching weapon there with Houston. And then I round out with a couple guys from last year, which at this point, no real fancy viability. They're late stashes. Luke Schoonmaker of Dallas playing behind Jake Ferguson, Darnell Washington of Pittsburgh playing behind Pat Freiermuth and also being used, too much as an interior blocker. Davis Allen of the Rams, who might get a real opportunity this year in the beginning of the year to be the starter there, and we'll see how that materializes there. And then Brenton Strange and Will Mallory, Jacksonville and Indy, a lot of guys. Obviously, Brenton Strange playing behind Evan Ingram, and seems to be a little bit of a wasted pick there by Jacksonville at the end of the second round last year, which I think a lot of people thought it was way too early, including myself. And then Will Mallory, an interesting pass catcher and athleticism, but also a guy that, kind of a little bit buried on the depth chart there. So there it is, guys. My blended combined 2023 and 2024 Dynasty Rookie Rankings. I think they're great for any rookie drafts you still might have. I think they're great for trade conversations. I think they're great conversation for startup drafts and just overall, kind of fitting guys together on your Dynasty rankings for your draft plans. If you still have a draft upcoming for rookies, or if you still have a startup draft planned sometime over the summer. Any individual questions, maybe for your league, reach out to me on Twitter. Tell me what your roster looks like, what your settings are, and I will gladly respond to anybody's questions about these rankings, your roster. Would I make a trade? Would I pass on a trade? Stuff like that. So if you're loving this content, please get over to the website, S2S Football, fastest and easiest way to get there. Check out the premium content tab for $9.99. You get access to all of our premium notebooks. The rankings notebook, all these rankings would be there, updated in real time. You get the scouting notebook. It has detailed player scouting reports on almost 100 of the rookies that were just drafted. And then you also get, in the rankings notebook, our Devy rankings, our positional dynasty rankings, our IDP rookie rankings, and so much more. And then the draft projections notebook. The draft is obviously come and gone, but there's 400 prospects in there, a snapshot of how they win, all their measurements. It's a great resource when you're looking for some diamonds in the rough. You're reading up on some guys, for your IDP settings and stuff like drafts and stuff like that. A lot of research in there as well. It's the best way to support the show and help us continue to do what we do here. So, on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nakano, and myself, thank you for joining us, and we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.